Namaste. Once upon a time in a land far away, once upon a time in a land far away, there lived the tale of tales that I bring to you today. Na 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 na. Once upon a time. What does that remind you of? Yes, absolutely right. A story. Stories are all around us, be it movies, documentaries, advertisements, political rallies, open mics, stand-up comedies, digital media. All are based on the solid foundation of storytelling, and they all leverage stories. We all read, listen to, and tell stories every day. But the art of oral storytelling is very different from just reading out or describing an incident, a person, place, etc., etc. History, mythology, legends, folktales, they can all be transformed into wonderful telltales for various purposes, such as to engage, entertain, educate, inspire, or motivate your audience to action. But the question is, what is it? What is it that makes storytelling so powerful? Science has already proven that facts and figures alone activate very limited parts of our brain. In contrast, a well-told story, yes, a well-told story has the capability to stimulate and activate multiple parts of our brain simultaneously. The visual cortex, sensory cortex, motor cortex, language processing parts, and the key moments in a story also help release and stimulate different hormones such as dopamine, which is a memory-aiding hormone, oxytocin, which is a trust hormone, etc., etc. All this and so much more that happens when a storytelling allows and engages the listener both with the story and the storyteller. And this ensures that they are deeply connected compared to anything else. So now you must be wondering, who am I and what's my connection to storytelling? I am an oral storyteller, a performer storyteller, a corporate storyteller, a storytelling educationist, and a storytelling facilitator. However, what's common in all of these roles is my telling stories. So, if stories are at the core of all that I do, I must ensure that I make each of my telling uniquely engaging, entertaining, educative, inspiring, heart-touching, and thought-provoking for my audience. So, when, as a storyteller, I work on tales, I like to make folk tales, legends, history, mythology uniquely my own. And how do I do that? So what's my formula to making a tale tellable? Step 1. I take the theme or the subject that I need to tell a story on and start my basic research on it. Next, after going through a whole lot of stories on that theme, I pick up and select one of the stories that really appeal to me and speak to me. In fact, in my world of storytelling, it is commonly believed and said that a storyteller does not choose its own story. However, it's the story that chooses its own teller. So, honoring whichever story finally chooses me, I start work on that, and this time around, I start an intensive research on the story that I have picked up, which is based on the material that's available in the public domain. I also reach out to people who are connected with that theme or subject or story in my circle, and sometimes I also reach out to outsiders. Next, step number 3. Once I have all the material collected with me, I start to soak in the material that comes my way. And I keep making my notes and I keep highlighting all the things, incidents that could serve as an important recipe to my story foundation. It could be related to the characters, the theme, the setting, the plot, incidents, etc., etc. I put it all together. And next, step number 4. I look at all of it and I look at how do I structure my story? What's going to be the narrative structure of my storytelling? And then I write down my first draft. Once I'm through with my first draft, I start to read it. And as I read it, I do visualization. I start to visualize how the story will be received by my audience. And visualization serves an important technique for me to help me connect with my audience even before I have met them. And it also allows me to put the important pieces of my story puzzle all together. And with this, we go to step number 6, which is editing. So I start to edit, look at all the possible omissions that I may have done, or repetitions. In case there is a flab, I do all of it to tighten my story and make it relevant, engaging, and meaningful for my audience. With that, we have the first story ready to be taken to the audience. Are we ready, really? No, not quite yet. There is still something else left to be done, which is I still have to do the Eping of my story. Wondering what's Eping? Eping is embellishing, enhancing, and personalizing my telling. And how do I do that? I identify the touch points in my storytelling and where I could engage with my audience through different ways. And some of my ways through which I ep my telling are use of music, folk songs, gestures, question, etc., etc., etc. So let me demonstrate this for you. Okay, so a lot of times, even before I start telling my story, I invoke my audience and take them into the storytelling mood. And how do I do that? Through this. Let's try this with you. Can we do that? And that's how we get our audience to come right there, physically and mentally ready to listen to the story. So once I've done that and I have my audience with me, let me give you an example of one of the times when I did the telling of an Indian adaptation of a folk tale from Congo. To introduce my story characters and the context of the story, wherein the theme was love, understanding, and home, I used this song to introduce my story characters. Long, long ago, there was a boy and there was a girl. She loved him and he loved her, but she didn't know, he didn't know. Long, long ago. And then the story progresses. For another of my telling, which was where I was invited to tell a story on one of the characters from Indian freedom struggle, I chose one from my region where I hail from, that's Punjab. And the story was of a freedom fighter by the name Bibi Gulab Kaur. So, as I was telling her story, at one moment, which was the key turning point in the story, the character actually removes her bangles from her wrist and shows it to the menfolk around to invoke the fighter in them. And I thought, let me make this moment one of the key highlights of my story, because that's where my audience can actually feel the strength of her character and can relate to her deeply. So I actually removed my own bangles and showed it to my audience and took a pause. And then I went on to narrate the rest of the story. And post my telling, long after my telling, that stayed as one key visual for my audience. and they related to it and they could feel what the character felt at that time. So I'll give you one last example. Another timeless tale from the Punjab and Sindh region of undivided India. The story set in 17th century. One of the very popular tragic romances by the name Soni Mahiwal. I used the flashback narrative structure to open and set the scene for my story. And here I'd like to credit Jat brothers from Pakistan and Gurdas Manji from India to help me bring this folk song that I grew up on into this story. So that is how it began. ਮੈਨੂੰ ਪਾਰ ਲੰਘਾ ਦੇਵੇ ਉਹ ਕੜਿਆ ਮਿੰਤਾ ਤੇਰੀਆਂ ਕਰਦੀ ਪਿੱਛੇ ਹਟ ਜਾ ਸੋਹਣੀਏ ਨੀ ਇੱਥੇ ਕੋਈ ਨਹੀਂ ਤੇਰਾ ਦਰਦੀ Go back, Soni, go back. Who are you risking your life for? Who is he? Is he worth it? Oh, my friend, my dear little pot, you ask me who is he? Is he worth it? He's Mahiwal, my Mahiwal. And having said that, Soni's thoughts drifted back to the time their eyes first met. The first time Soni saw Mahiwal. And from there, the story progresses in the flashback. So, these are some of my ways to eep my telling, which is to embellish, enhance, and personalize my telling. And with this, we are ready to practice the story. I live the story practically day in and day out. I breathe the story, own the story, till the time the story becomes me and I become the story. And that's when I'm ready to share the gift of my telling, the gift of my story with my audience so that they could become one with it. And while I do all of this, very importantly, I credit the sources that I have referred to in order to weave the story together and the telling together. So that, ladies and gentlemen, has been my way to making tales tellable, the finer art of storytelling. And these are some of the glimpses of my actual work, of my using 6 steps and eeping the telling. So, as they say, perhaps 4 of the most powerful words in the history of mankind. Once upon a time. Once upon a time in a land far away, there lived the tale of tales that I brought to you today. Na 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 na. Thank you very much for being a wonderful audience. Happy storying and namaste.